Hello and welcome to Korby's Book Club, where I tell you about books that I've read that I think you might enjoy.
She was a book nerd, she had blonde hair.
This little gem is called The Lessons of History, and despite its uninspiring title, it's a real treasure of wisdom and perspective written by two of the more celebrated historians of the 20th century. I read it this spring a few pages at a time, not because it was boring, but because the authors wasted no words in their distillation and analysis of the sum total of recorded human experience. The Lessons of History is suffused with goodwill and an earnest love of knowledge and a sympathy for the human experience. I think anyone interested in questions involving the challenges of life or the social organization of human beings would do better to spend a few hours with the product of the Durant's investigation than with anything happening on a screen. A bit of background. This thin volume of just over 100 pages was written by Will and Arial Durant, husband and wife, after they finished their Pulitzer Prize-winning 11-volume series, The Story of Civilization. A few quick biographical details. Ariel, the wife, was named Woman of the Year in 1977 by the city of Los Angeles, the same year that they were both awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom by Gerald Ford. Famous not only for their love of history, but for their own marriage. At the end of their lives, they wrote a 400-page dual autobiography. They died in 1981, 2 weeks apart. The Lessons of History is organized around 12 perspectives, arranged as chapters. So you get history and biology, history and character, history and morals, history and socialism, and so on. Some of the chapters are just a few pages. Obviously, this was intended to be a survey, and they admit at the beginning of their book to a multitude of doubts assailing their enterprise. I want to read you this little passage because it gives a good indication of both the scope and intention of the book. Since man is a moment in astronomic time, a transient guest of the earth, a spore of his species, a scion of his race, a composite of body, character, and mind, a member of a family and a community, a believer or a doubter of faith, a unit in the economy, perhaps a citizen in a state or a soldier in an army. We may ask what history has to say about the nature, conduct, and prospects of man. It is a precarious enterprise, and only a fool would try to compress 100 centuries into 100 pages of hazardous conclusions. Nevertheless, we proceed. It's impossible when you read this book not to compare episodes from the past with our own little moment in history. In the chapter Economics in History, the Durants write, "The experience of the past leaves little doubt that every economic system must sooner or later rely on some form of the profit motive to stir individuals and groups to productivity. And since practical ability differs from person to person, the majority of abilities is gathered in a minority of people. The concentration of wealth is a natural result of the difference. In progressive societies, the concentration may reach a point where the strength of number in the poor, who are many, rivals the strength of ability in the rich, who are few. The instability can reach a critical situation, which history has diversely met by legislation redistributing wealth or by revolution distributing poverty." For example, in Athens in 594 BCE, this is the historian Plutarch who writes this disparity between the rich and the poor had reached a crisis moment. The status of the poor was at its nadir. The government was in the hands of their masters. The courts were corrupt and were deciding every issue against them, and consequently the city was filled with talk of violent revolt. The rich, who were angry at the challenge to their property, were prepared to defend themselves by force. In time, good sense prevailed. A businessman of an aristocratic lineage, one Solon, was elected. He did a number of things to ease back the situation. He devalued the currency, thereby easing the burden on the debtors. He reduced all personal debts. He eliminated imprisonment for debt. He established a graduated tax that made the rich pay 12 times more than the poor. He reorganized the courts along a more popular basis, and he established a dictum whereby sons whose fathers had been killed in war for Athens were to be educated at the state's expense. The rich protested that his measures amounted to an outright confiscation. Nonetheless, within a generation, pretty much everybody agreed that Solon had saved Athens from revolution. Good job. In a different chapter, Character and History, the Durant's right that human nature has changed very little since the beginning of recorded history. The Greeks of Plato's time behaved like the modern French, the ancient Romans like the modern English. So too, human impulses don't differ according to class. By and large, the poor have the same impulses as the rich, only with less opportunity to realize them. And nothing, write the Durants, is clearer in history than the adoption by successful rebels of the methods they were accustomed to condemn in the forces they deposed. Okay, it's difficult to further summarize a book that's already been heralded as a masterpiece of distillation. So mostly my purpose here is to inspire you to pick up a copy yourself. You can do so by ordering one from, say, my favorite bookstore, the Bookshop in East Nashville. They'll send it to you if you order it online. Support small businesses. Nonetheless, I want to leave you with a last quote, the one that might be helpful in this, our moment of unparalleled division between the liberal and conservative perspectives at play in our citizenry. Discussing the reflexive role individuals play in historical formation, the Durants write, "Intellect is therefore a vital force in history, but it can also be a destructive power. Out of every 100 new ideas, 99 or more will probably be inferior to the traditional responses which they propose to replace. No one person, however brilliant or well-informed, can come in one lifetime to such a fullness of understanding as to safely judge and dismiss the customs or institutions of his society. For these are the wisdom of generations after centuries of experiment in the laboratory of history. So, the conservative who resists change is as valuable as the radical who proposes it. Perhaps more valuable, as in plants, where roots are more vital than grafts. It is good that new ideas should be heard for the sake of the few that can be used. But it is also good that new ideas should be compelled to go through the mill of objection, opposition, and contumely. This is the trial heat which innovations must survive before being allowed to enter the human race. It is good that the old should resist the young, and that the young should prod the old. Out of this tension comes a creative tensile strength, a stimulated development, and a secret and basic unity in the movement of the whole." If that's not wisdom, I don't know what is. Okay, that's it for this episode of Korby's Book Club. Remember, music keeps you young, but reading keeps you sharp. See you next time.
She was a book nerd, she had blonde hair, with a paperback in her back pocket.